There's a man sitting in a hospital waiting room right now. He's 67 years old, retired. He spent 40 years doing the same job, the same way, in the same building. And 2 weeks ago, a doctor handed him a diagnosis. Not life-threatening, but serious enough. Serious enough that he needed to completely change how he ate, how he slept, how he lived. And do you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't the diagnosis. It wasn't the fear. It was sitting across from that doctor, nodding along to words he didn't understand, processes he'd never learned, habits he'd never been taught, and realizing, for the first time in his life, that he had stopped growing. Somewhere between comfort and routine, he had quietly, almost invisibly, stopped learning. And life hadn't stopped to wait for him. That man is real. And in some version of this story, that man might be you or someone you love. This is a video about what happens when we stop learning. And more importantly, what becomes possible when we don't. Here's something nobody tells you when you're young. Learning doesn't stop feeling good because it gets hard. Learning stops because it gets comfortable not to. Think about the last time you truly learned something. Not scrolled past a fact on your phone. Not heard a statistic and forgot it by Tuesday. I mean, genuinely wrestled with something. Sat with confusion. Let it feel awkward. And then felt the slow, satisfying click of understanding falling into place. When did that last happen? For most people, it happens regularly until around their mid-20s. Then it starts to slow down. Then it almost stops altogether. Psychologists have a term for this. They call it cognitive entrenchment, the process by which expertise and familiarity actually make it harder to think in new ways. The more you know about something, the more locked in your thinking becomes. You stop seeing possibilities, you start seeing categories. And here's the cruel irony. The smarter you get in one area, the more blind you can become everywhere else. A Harvard study on adult learning found that most adults, by their mid-30s, had stopped deliberately seeking out new knowledge in areas outside of their profession. Not because they were incapable, not because they lacked the time, but because they no longer felt the urgency. And that's the trap. Because life never got that memo. Life kept moving. Technology changed. Relationships evolved. The world you thought you understood quietly became a different world entirely. And the people who kept learning, kept adapting, moved with it. The rest were left staring at a world that felt increasingly foreign, wondering when everything got so complicated. Let me tell you about a study that changed the way neuroscientists think about aging. In the 1990s, a group of researchers began studying a collection of handwritten autobiographies written by nuns in their 20s. These documents had been sitting in an archive for decades. The researchers cross-referenced the writing with the nuns' medical records, specifically who developed Alzheimer's, who didn't, and when. What they found was extraordinary. The nuns who had written with greater idea density, more complex sentences, more layered thinking, more intellectual depth, in their 20s were dramatically less likely to develop Alzheimer's in their 70s and 80s. Even in cases where their brains showed the physical markers of the disease at autopsy, many of them had never shown symptoms. Why? Because they had spent their entire lives building what scientists now call cognitive reserve. Essentially a backup system for the brain, a network so rich, so densely connected, that when one pathway failed, the brain simply rerouted around it. Learning didn't just make them smarter, it made them resilient. Now think about what the opposite looks like. Think about what it costs. Not just in potential, but in actual, measurable, neurological terms. When a person decides that they already know enough. The brain is not a hard drive. It's not a fixed container that fills up. It's a living system. And like every living system, it follows one ruthless rule. Use it or lose it. Every time you avoid a challenge, every time you choose the comfort of what you already know over the discomfort of something new, you're not just missing an opportunity. You are, quite literally, allowing a part of your mind to quietly go dark. That's the cost, and almost nobody counts it. But here's where the story changes. Because while all of this sounds grim, there is a truth embedded inside it that is almost unbearably hopeful. The brain can change at any age. This isn't motivational fluff. This is neuroscience. The discovery of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections, rewire itself, grow, shattered the old belief that we are born with a fixed capacity and that's all we get. A 68-year-old woman in Japan took up competitive chess in her retirement. Within 3 years, she was competing at a national level. A man named Fauja Singh ran his first marathon at 89. Not a fun run, a marathon. He finished in under 6 hours and went on to run 7 more before he was 100. A programmer named Ray learned to paint at 71 after his wife passed away. He said it was the only thing that made him feel like himself again. 2 years later, his work was in a gallery. These aren't exceptional people. They're people who made one decision, to refuse the idea that their learning was done. And that decision, that single quiet refusal, changed everything. I want to stop for a second and push back on something. When we talk about learning, most people immediately think of school, of textbooks and classrooms and grades. And if that's what learning means to you, I understand why you'd want to be done with it. But that's not what learning is. Learning is what happens when a conversation surprises you and you lean in instead of getting defensive. Learning is what happens when you're wrong about something and you let yourself sit with that wrongness long enough to actually understand it. Learning is choosing a book about a subject you know nothing about, asking a question you're afraid sounds stupid, watching a documentary about something that makes you uncomfortable, actually listening to someone whose life looks nothing like yours. Learning is curiosity treated as a practice, not an event. And here's the thing about curiosity. It's not a personality trait. It's not something you either have or you don't. Research out of UC Davis showed that curiosity activates the same dopamine reward pathways as physical pleasure. Your brain is literally built to enjoy learning. You don't lack the desire. You've just buried it under certainty. And certainty, the feeling of already knowing, is one of the most dangerous comfort zones there is. I want you to think about the most interesting person you've ever met. Not the most successful, not the most impressive, the most interesting. I'd be willing to bet that what made them interesting wasn't what they knew. It was how they related to what they didn't know. They probably asked better questions than most people. They probably had stories from wildly different parts of life. They probably made you feel, in their presence, like the world was bigger than you thought. That quality has a name. Some researchers call it perpetual beta. The mindset of treating yourself as a work in progress, permanently, never finished, never complete, always, in some corner of your life, a student. The greatest thinkers in history weren't defined by the answers they had. They were defined by the questions they couldn't stop asking. Leonardo da Vinci kept notebooks his entire life, not to record what he knew, but to wrestle with what he didn't. Albert Einstein once said that he had no special talent, he was simply passionately curious. And Maya Angelou, one of the most celebrated writers of the 20th century, said something that should probably be posted on every wall. When you know better, you do better. When you know better, you do better. That's it. That's the whole philosophy. That's the engine underneath every meaningful life ever lived. Let's come back to the man in the waiting room. His name, let's say, is David. And after that diagnosis, after that moment of quiet reckoning, something unexpected happened. He didn't spiral. He didn't give up. He went home, and he started reading. He started asking questions. He joined a group. He talked to his doctor like a partner, not a stranger. He learned about his body in ways he never had in 67 years of living inside it. And something else happened, something he didn't expect. He started to feel alive again, not because everything got easier, but because he was engaged, because he was paying attention, because for the first time in years, he was growing. And growth, it turns out, is where aliveness lives. Here is what I want you to take from this. You are not too old. You are not too busy. You are not too far behind. The moment you decide to learn something, anything, you are already ahead of the person who decided to stop. Every day that you stay curious is a day that you are compounding interest on your own potential. And unlike money, that kind of wealth cannot be taken from you. It cannot be inflated away or devalued by circumstance. What you know, truly know, deeply understand, that belongs to you forever. So the next time you feel the pull to stay comfortable, the pull to say, I already know enough, I'm set, I don't need to change. Pause for just a second and ask yourself, has life stopped teaching me? It hasn't. It never does. The only question is whether you're still paying attention. Keep going. Keep asking. Keep learning. Because the day you stop is the day you start disappearing. Slowly, quietly, comfortably, into who you used to be. And you are not finished yet.